She took a vow of silence for 7 years. 7 years without music, without mirrors, without her own name. Just scripture, solitude, service. She wore white, prayed before dawn, and believed she had found her calling until the silence began to echo. And one day in the quiet corner of an old library, she opened a book she wasn't supposed to touch, the Qur'an. Just one page, just one line. And when my servants ask you about me, indeed I am near. Surah Al-Baqarah 286. She stared at it, because this book spoke back. Press 1 if you believe God finds people in silence. Press 2 if you believe truth doesn't shout, it whispers. Her name was Sister Magdalena, but what she became was Miriam. And the path between those two names is the story you're about to hear. They called her Sister Magdalena. She was the youngest nun at the Convento di Santa Lucia, a silent order tucked into the rolling hills of Umbria, Italy. The walls were limestone, the corridors cool, the rules unbending. Sister Magdalena had taken her final vows at 23. She gave up mirrors. She gave up music. She gave up her name. She rose every morning before the sun dressed in white linen and walked barefoot to the chapel for matins, the first of 7 daily prayers. No one in the convent spoke. Only scripture was allowed on their lips. No idle talk, no laughter, no names, just silence as an offering. She hadn't grown up religious. Her childhood was loud, broken home city noise parents, too busy arguing to pray. But when she first stepped inside the convent as a teenager on a school trip, something in the stillness called her. It felt like rest, like safety, like a place where pain couldn't reach her. So she stayed, finished high school, did 2 years of theology, then joined the order. For years, the silence was a gift. She prayed, she served, she swept chapel floors and grew herbs in the garden. She studied the Bible by candlelight, wept over the Psalms, memorized the Beatitudes. She was sincere. She didn't want the world. She didn't want a career or a man or even recognition. She just wanted God. But something began to shift in her 6th year. It wasn't dramatic, no dreams, no scandals, no sudden doubts. Just a quiet ache, a hollow place in her chest that scripture no longer seemed to fill. She would read the words of Jesus, beautiful, yes, but feel like something was missing, as if she were trying to breathe with one lung. She didn't tell anyone. She just prayed harder, fasted more often, woke up even earlier, but the ache grew louder. One winter evening, she was in the convent's small library, a narrow room, dusty windows, old books with cracked spines. She was cataloging donations, something they rarely received when she saw it. A plain green book. Arabic letters on the front, no cross, no familiar seal, just the title in English. The Qur'an. She froze. She'd never touched a Qur'an before, had never even seen one in real life. It wasn't banned in the convent, just ignored. The nuns only read church-approved texts. This wasn't one of them. Still, she looked around. The hallway was empty. Something in her chest whispered, just one page. She opened to a random spot. And when my servants ask you concerning me, indeed I am near. I respond to the call of the caller when he calls upon me. Surah Al-Baqarah 2:186. She blinked. Read it again. Not poetic like Psalms, not parabolic like the Gospels, just direct. I am near. She stared at it. It felt like someone had spoken to her directly. She closed the book quickly, put it back on the shelf, backed away like it had burned her. That night she couldn't sleep, not because of guilt, because of pull. She had read one sentence, just one, and it had done something the scriptures hadn't done in years. It had answered her. The next day during afternoon chores, she found herself whispering the verse under her breath. Indeed I am near. It stayed with her. In the garden, in the chapel. Even in dreams, she tried to dismiss it, told herself it was just curiosity, just coincidence. But deep down she knew something had shifted. A week passed, then 2. She avoided the library, avoided the shelf, but the silence that used to bring her peace now echoed with questions. The following Friday, after Vespers, Sister Magdalena slipped into the library again. She knew the timing. The others would be preparing for the night vigil. The halls would be quiet. She stood before the shelf. Same green book, same cracked spine. She pulled it out, hands trembling. Open to a new page. Say He is Allah the One, Allah the Eternal Refuge. He neither begets nor is born, and there is none comparable to Him. Surah Al-Ikhlas. She didn't understand all of it, but something about the simplicity struck her. It wasn't explaining God through metaphor. It wasn't trying to convince her. It was declaring, with authority, with clarity. She whispered the words softly, over and over, not as a prayer, not as defiance, just as truth. The next few nights she returned, always alone, always careful. She never took the book out of the room, never spoke of it, but page by page it began to rearrange her soul. She read about Maryam, the mother of Jesus, not as a passive figure, but as a woman of courage. She read about Isa not as a sacrifice, but as a prophet born of a miracle. And she read words that shattered her understanding of worship. So remember me, I will remember you. Surah Al-Baqarah 2:152. Call upon me, I will respond to you. Surah Ghafir 40:60. She had never felt so spoken to. Not by a priest, not by scripture, not even in prayer. And that's what unsettled her. Because in the convent God was sacred, but distant, accessed through ritual, filtered through saints, wrapped in Latin. But here in this book, she was never told to read God was near, responsive, intimate, like He had been waiting for her to listen. One night she lingered too long. The library door creaked open. She froze. It was Sister Katerina, one of the elders, a kind woman but traditional, rigid. Katerina looked at the book in Magdalena's lap, paused, then spoke quietly. That is not our scripture. Magdalena nodded. I know. Katerina stared at her for a moment, then surprisingly didn't scold her. She simply said, be careful what you let into your silence. That night Magdalena couldn't sleep, not because of fear, but because of fire. Something had lit inside her, and no warning could put it out. Over the next month, she continued reading, slowly, secretly, and she began comparing, not with arrogance, but with longing. She loved Jesus, still did, but in the Qur'an, He was not God. He was a servant of God, and that changed everything. Because if He wasn't the final stop, then who was? She read Surah Al-Ikhlas again. He neither begets nor is born. And for the first time, she let herself say it quietly, trembling. Maybe He isn't a father. Maybe He's just God. She cried that night, not out of confusion, out of release, out of years of searching for a God she could talk to without protocol. And now here He was, not distant, not disguised, just one. She whispered again, He is Allah the One. And this time, it wasn't study, it was worship. By spring, the silence no longer brought her peace. It brought questions. Sister Magdalena still rose for matins, still walked barefoot to chapel, still wore her habit with devotion, but her prayers had changed. She no longer whispered them to Jesus. She whispered them to God, raw, unshaped, unclaimed by doctrine. If you are one, if you hear me without saints, then lead me where you are. She hadn't spoken aloud in 7 years. The vow of silence was sacred, but now her thoughts were loud enough to echo in every corridor of her mind. And she felt like she was living in two worlds, one clothed in ritual, the other in revelation. One afternoon, she received a letter. It was from her younger brother, Marco. She hadn't seen him since entering the convent. He rarely wrote. She opened it slowly, hands trembling. Magda, I don't know if you still think of me, but I think of you every time I see someone sitting alone in church. I'm not religious anymore, not like you, but I still talk to God. Or maybe He talks to me, I'm not sure. There's a woman I met. Her name is Layla. She's Muslim. And for the first time in years, someone made me feel like God was close. Magdalena froze. Layla, Muslim, close. She reread the sentence 3 times. She'd never told Marco anything about the Quran, But now her brother, secular, skeptical, distant, was writing about Islam and nearness. It was too aligned to ignore. A week later, the Mother Superior sent her into town for a routine errand, something she rarely did. Magdalena pulled her veil tight, keeping her head down as she walked through the cobbled streets of Assisi. The town was alive. Children ran with gelato. Old men argued about football. Street musicians played soft guitar. She stopped at a small bookstore to pick up a text for the convent. That's where she saw her, a woman in a soft blue hijab. She was browsing the philosophy shelf, one hand on a stroller, the other on a copy of the Confessions of St. Augustine. Muslim, but curious, modern, but modest. Their eyes met. Magdalena felt something strange, like recognition. The woman smiled. "Peace be upon you." Magdalena hesitated. She wasn't allowed to speak, but something cracked. "And upon you." Her voice was hoarse. It was the first time she had spoken in nearly a decade. The woman's eyes widened. "You're a nun?" Magdalena nodded. The woman extended her hand gently. "I'm Layla." They stood there for a moment, two women in different uniforms holding the same questions. Magdalena whispered, "Do you pray?" Layla nodded. "5 times a day, even when I don't feel like it." "Does he answer?" Layla smiled. "Not always how I want, but always in the way I need." Magdalena blinked, tears rising. Layla leaned in. "If you ever want to talk, really talk. I live just outside the city. Write this down." She handed her a business card. Magdalena held it like a lifeline, then looked down. The bookstore receipt in her other hand read, £7.77. She returned to the convent with the book, but her heart had stayed behind. That night she opened the Qur'an again. Same passage as before. "He is Allah, the One." She placed the business card beside it, then whispered, "I want to know you, even if it means breaking everything I've ever known." She had no plan, but she knew her silence had reached its end, and her surrender was just beginning. It took her 3 days to decide. 3 days of sleepless nights, of pacing the convent corridors in her socks, of staring at the Qur'an, then at the cross, then back again. Then she slipped the card into her pocket. That Sunday morning, she told the Mother Superior she needed solitude for prayer and reflection. The convent allowed occasional retiri, spiritual retreats. She borrowed a long coat from the storeroom, pulled her veil low, and walked out for the first time in 7 years. Not as Sister Magdalena, but as herself. Layla's house sat just outside the town, a simple yellow cottage with olive trees framing the path. Magdalena stood at the door, hand raised to knock, and froze. What was she doing? But before she could retreat, the door opened. Layla stood there, no surprise in her eyes, just peace. "Come in," she said gently. Magdalena stepped inside. The house smelled like cardamom and baby powder. A toddler's laughter echoed from a back room. Books lined the shelves, Qur'an Hadith works by Rumi and Khalil Gibran. Layla poured tea, offered dates, no questions, just welcome. They sat on the floor. For a long while, Magdalena said nothing. Then finally, "I don't know what I'm doing." Layla nodded. "You're searching. I took vows. I don't break them." Layla looked at her kindly. "Maybe you're not breaking them. Maybe you're fulfilling what they were always meant to lead you to." Magdalena wiped her eyes. "I've read the Qur'an, in secret." Layla smiled. "You're not the first. Every time I open it, it's like it knows me." "It does," Layla said. "It's not a book. It's a conversation." That afternoon, the adhan rang from Layla's phone. Gentle, clear. Magdalena froze. She'd never heard it outside a documentary. Layla stood to make wudu. Magdalena watched silently as she rinsed her hands, her face, her feet, then laid out 2 prayer rugs. "Would you like to just sit beside me while I pray?" Layla asked. Magdalena nodded. She didn't trust her voice. Layla stood facing east, raised her hands, and said, "Allahu Akbar." Magdalena felt the air shift. Each word was low, intentional, private and universal all at once. She watched Layla bow, then place her forehead to the ground. Sujud. And in that moment, something inside Magdalena cracked open. Not because she understood the Arabic, not because it was dramatic, but because she had never seen anyone pray with their entire body, with that kind of surrender. It wasn't performance, it wasn't ritual, it was returning. When the prayer ended, Layla sat quietly. Magdalena whispered, "That was beautiful." Layla nodded. "I don't always feel it, but today, I did." Magdalena looked at the rug. "Can I try?" Layla smiled. "No rules, just intention." Magdalena stood, copied what she remembered. Clumsy, slow, awkward. She bowed, then kneeled, then lowered herself into sujud. Her forehead touched the soft fabric, and everything else fell away. She stayed there a long time, didn't say anything, didn't need to. When she sat up, her cheeks were wet. She looked at Layla and whispered, "I think he was always this close. I just didn't know how to bow." Layla took her hand. "That's the first sujud." They sat in silence as the light faded, not as nun and Muslim, not as symbols, just as two women, and the one they were both seeking. She returned to the convent just before midnight. The halls were dark, the air still. Only the faint scent of beeswax candles remained from the vigil. Sister Magdalena walked quietly to her quarters, pulled off the coat, and folded Layla's prayer rug into her drawer tucked behind her rosary. She didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of her bed until dawn, hands clasped, heart racing. She had bowed, in sujud, said no words yet, it had said everything. At breakfast, she moved like a shadow, eyes lowered, mouth sealed, back straight. But her silence was no longer a vow. It was grief. The vow had been her anchor. Now it felt like a chain. After morning chores, the Mother Superior summoned her. They sat in the convent office. Two women dressed the same, yet standing on opposite shores. Mother Benedicta looked tired, her gray eyes kind but firm. "You left the grounds without proper record," Magdalena nodded. "I know," the mother studied her. "Then are you ready to tell me where you went?" Magdalena hesitated, then said the one name that meant everything now, Layla. The room stilled. The mother said nothing for a long time, then stood, walked to the small chapel window, and stared out. Finally, softly, "Did she give you peace?" Magdalena blinked. This wasn't what she expected. "Yes. She helped me pray." The mother turned. "I suspected. From the way you've been moving, you've been carrying something." Magdalena's voice cracked. "I didn't want to betray the order." "You didn't. I read the Qur'an. I know." Silence. Then to her shock, Mother Benedicta walked over and sat beside her. "I took my vows 40 years ago, but before that, I studied Islam." Magdalena's breath caught. "You did?" The mother nodded slowly. "I was a student in Cairo, curious, hungry for God, but I chose this path, and I've kept to it. You, child, may be choosing yours now." Tears filled Magdalena's eyes. "I feel like I'm walking away from everything I promised." "No," the mother said, "you're walking towards something," Magdalena whispered. "Then, I can't stay." "I know." They sat in silence. The bells rang for noon prayer, but neither moved. Finally, Mother Benedicta said, "Take tonight. Pray, and tomorrow, I will bless your journey." Magdalena returned to her room. She packed slowly. Not much. Her Bible, her Qur'an, a few clothes, Layla's prayer rug. She paused at her old journal tucked between Psalms and Proverbs. Inside the cover she had once written, "To find God in silence." She picked up a pen and added, "and to hear him in sujud." That night she went to the chapel one last time. She sat in the last pew alone. The stained glass glowed blue and red under moonlight. She didn't recite anything. She just listened, then stood, faced the front, and whispered, "Thank you for this part of the path, and for where it leads next." In the morning she dressed in plain clothes, left the veil behind. The sisters gathered quietly. None asked questions. Some cried. Some smiled softly. Mother Benedicta placed her hands on Magdalena's shoulders. "Go with God wherever his name is called." Magdalena nodded. "And may he guide you in every tongue." She walked down the hill, the same one she had walked up as a girl. But now, she wasn't escaping. She was returning to the world, to the questions, to God. At the bottom of the hill, Layla waited in her car. They embraced. No words, just knowing. And so the nun who took a vow of silence broke it not in rebellion but in truth. She wasn't running from God. She was running to Him. The first night in Layla's guest room felt surreal. No bells, no wood floors, no silence. Just the sound of wind through the olive trees outside and a toddler snoring gently across the hall. Magdalena lay on a modest mattress, staring at the ceiling. She wasn't Sister Magdalena anymore. No vows, no veil, no role to perform. Just a woman and her Lord. The next morning, Layla knocked softly. "Would you like to come to Jumu'ah?" Magdalena had read about Friday prayer, the weekly gathering, the khutbah, the sujud. She nodded. They arrived at a small masjid tucked between two apartment buildings. It was simple, no grandeur. The women's section was a carpeted room upstairs. Magdalena's heart pounded as she stepped inside. She expected stares, whispers, suspicion, but what she found was warmth. Women greeted her with soft smiles. One offered her a hijab, which she tied loosely. Another asked if it was her first time. She nodded. The woman placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then welcome, sister. Allah brought you here for a reason." They sat in rows on the floor. A quiet hum of Qur'an surrounded her. Children giggled in the corner. Then the call to prayer. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Hayya ala salah, Hayya ala al-falah. Magdalena closed her eyes. The words felt familiar now, not by language but by rhythm. They sounded like home. The khutbah began. The imam spoke in Italian with Quranic Arabic woven in. He spoke of repentance, of starting again, of Allah's mercy outpacing His wrath. And then he quoted the ayah say, "O my servants who have transgressed against themselves, do not despair of the mercy of Allah." Surah Az-Zumar 39:53. Magdalena froze. She had read that line weeks ago, but now it felt spoken to her. Not read, not recited, spoken. Tears filled her eyes. Not dramatic, just full. She whispered, "I'm not too far gone. Not for Allah, not for this place, not for this path." After prayer, she sat alone in the back, tracing the Arabic script on a pocket-sized Quran Layla had given her. She couldn't read it yet, but she knew every letter had waited for her. Over the next few weeks, her life fell into new rhythms. She helped Layla with errands, took long walks at dusk, began learning tajweed, slowly, painfully, joyfully. She stumbled over every syllable, alif, ba, ta, but she smiled with every mistake, because this wasn't theology anymore. It was relationship. One evening while reviewing Surah Al-Fatiha, she paused at a word she'd passed over before ihdina. Guide us, not prove yourself, not convince me, just guide us. A request, a whisper, a surrender. Magdalena closed the book and went outside. The sky was blushing gold. A gentle wind carried birds overhead. She laid her prayer rug in the grass, faced the Qibla, stood, raised her hands, and said Allahu Akbar, not as an echo, but as her own voice. She prayed slowly, stumbling on the Arabic. But sujud came easily now, and in that sujud she felt something anchor in her soul. She didn't belong to a convent anymore. She belonged to Allah. That night she wrote in her journal again, "I once served in silence. Now I live in submission." Summer was fading when Magdalena boarded the train to Granada. Layla hugged her at the platform. "You'll love it there," she said. "A city where echoes don't die." Magdalena smiled. She wore a soft beige hijab, now loose but firm, her eyes clearer, still quiet, but no longer unsure. Granada wasn't an escape, it was return. She arrived just before Maghrib. The golden light poured over the Alhambra like honey. Stone arches, ancient fountains. A sky blushed with the stories of empires that once bowed in sujud. She walked slowly through the old quarter Al-Baisin. White walls, cobbled steps, whispers in Spanish and Arabic, and then she found it. A small masjid tucked behind a fig tree. No minaret, no banner, just a carved wooden sign, Centro Islamico de la Luz, the center of light. She entered through a narrow archway. The scent of oud lingered in the air. Inside, a courtyard opened to the sky. Women gathered in a circle near the fountain, reciting softly. One approached her. "Are you visiting?" Magdalena nodded. "I came to finish something." The imam was a gentle man with silver hair and kind eyes. When she told him her story, he didn't ask questions. He simply nodded. "Then let's welcome you home." That evening, as the sun melted behind the Sierra Nevada mountains, Magdalena stood barefoot in the courtyard. A few witnesses gathered. The walls held silence. The trees listened. She closed her eyes, took a breath, and said, "Ashhadu alla ilaha illallah, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah." The imam smiled. "You are now Maryam." Her knees buckled not from weakness, but from weightlessness. The weight she had carried for years of questions, vows, doubts had finally fallen away. She prayed Maghrib that night in full Arabic, every syllable still shaky, but every word hers. That weekend she visited the gardens of Alhambra. She stood beneath arches where Muslims once recited Qur'an as empires crumbled around them. She looked up at the calligraphy in the stone, "Wala ghalib illa Allah." There is no victor but Allah. She closed her eyes and smiled. "I know," she whispered. "I finally know." She spent the next month in Granada, studying Arabic, volunteering at the center, walking the same streets where Islam once flourished under moonlight and minarets. But her favorite place was the small masjid courtyard. Every night she would lay her prayer rug beside the fountain, and in sujud, she remembered who she had become. Her last night in Spain, she wrote in her journal, "My name is Maryam. I used to pray in silence, wondering if he heard me. Now I whisper and feel him nearer than breath." She flew back to Italy as a new woman. Some friends reached out with confusion, some with anger, a few with awe. But she didn't defend herself. She didn't debate. She just lived, with light in her walk, with Qur'an in her heart, with sujud as her sanctuary. One day, months later, she received a letter from Sister Katerina. Inside a single line, I found a Qur'an in the library. I read one page. "I think I understand now." Miriam smiled, folded the letter, pressed it into the back of her journal, and whispered, "Guide her to Yarab, the way you guided me." She wasn't trying to change the world. She was just walking it barefoot, bowing belonging, of the convent, of the silence, of the searching, and the beginning of Miriam. He'd lectured at Harvard, debated bishops and sheikhs on national TV, authored 4 bestsellers on why God is nothing more than a comforting illusion. They called him the ice mind. No emotions, just logic, cold, clinical, undefeated. Until one day, he met a boy, 10 years old, brown eyes, a lunchbox in one hand, and a Qur'an in the other. Press 1 if you believe a child's sincerity can break what adult arguments cannot. Press 2 if you've ever been humbled by someone far younger than you. He walked into that classroom expecting to win, expecting to laugh, expecting to leave unshaken. He didn't expect a question so simple, it shattered everything. And what happened after that, even he had no defense for. Dr. Thomas Hargrove didn't believe in fairy tales. He believed in the elegance of equations, the finality of biology, and the cold precision of reason. He once said in a live debate, "Hope is not evidence, faith is not fact, and God is not necessary." The crowd had cheered, it always did. He was, after all, the atheist philosopher, celebrated author of The Delusion of Divinity and God, the Last Invention of Fear. 4 honorary doctorates, over 100 university debates. No recorded defeats. He prided himself on dismantling beliefs like puzzles, methodically, mercilessly, and always politely. So when the invitation came from a private school in Virginia, one of those interfaith education days where children were exposed to different worldviews, he almost ignored it. Almost. The email had a line that caught his attention. "Our students are curious. You may find the exchange more engaging than expected." Dr. Hargrove smirked. "Cute," he muttered. Then he replied, "Accepted." The school was a modest, ivy-covered building nestled between a park and a church, the kind of place parents paid for character education and real-world exposure. Dr. Hargrove arrived in a charcoal gray suit, his signature round glasses, and a briefcase that hadn't left his side in a decade. He was escorted to the library where a small group of students waited ages 10 to 12. Some wore yarmulkes, some wore crosses, and one wore a kufi. That one sat near the back, quiet, composed. He was drawing something on the corner of a notebook, Arabic letters. Maybe Dr. Hargrove didn't look twice. The teacher introduced him as Dr. Hargrove, a philosopher and author who explores questions about life meaning and whether or not God exists. The word exist echoed in the library like a small challenge. Dr. Hargrove gave his usual 5-minute version. Religion is ancient psychology. God is a projection of fear and hope. Morality doesn't require revelation. Why does science explains what matters? The kids mostly nodded. Some looked bored. A few glanced at each other, unsure. Then the teacher asked any questions for Dr. Hargrove's silence, until a soft voice said, "I have one." All eyes turned to the boy in the kufi. He was small, maybe 10, big brown eyes, calm posture. Dr. Hargrove looked mildly amused. "Go ahead," he said. The boy stood. "My name is Ibrahim," he said, "and I'm Muslim. Nice to meet you, Ibrahim." Ibrahim nodded. "You said you don't believe in God because there's no evidence, that's correct? But do you believe in love?" Dr. Hargrove blinked, smiled. "Of course I do. Can you measure it?" A few kids giggled. The teacher raised an eyebrow. Dr. Hargrove adjusted his glasses. "Love is observable through behavior, neurochemicals, attachment, social response. It has biological basis." Ibrahim tilted his head. "But is that love, or just the body reacting to it?" Dr. Hargrove's smile faded a fraction. He leaned in. "What are you trying to say? I'm just wondering," Ibrahim said softly. "If something real can exist, even if it's invisible, if love can't be seen but we all know it's real, why can't God be like that too?" The library was silent. Even the teacher didn't breathe. Dr. Hargrove took a long pause, then spoke measured, precise. "That's a clever analogy. But God isn't just invisible. He's unproven. We don't have experiments, no peer-reviewed data, no replication." Ibrahim nodded. "But didn't you say earlier that hope is not evidence?" "Yes. Then why do you hope you're right?" The philosopher froze. It was a gentle question, but it landed like a punch. "I don't hope I'm right," he said slowly. "I conclude I'm right. But your conclusion comes from what you already believe." Right? Ibrahim's voice wasn't challenging. It was curious, innocent, and somehow that made it worse. The teacher stepped in, smiling nervously. Well, that was quite a thoughtful exchange, but the room didn't move. Dr. Hargrove stared at Ibrahim. For the first time in years, he didn't have a clean answer. Just a quiet question echoing louder than it should have. "Why do you hope you're right?" That night back in his hotel room, he couldn't sleep. He opened his briefcase, took out his lecture notes, reviewed his standard rebuttals. None of them applied. Not to that. Not to a 10-year-old boy who asked a question with no agenda, just truth. The train back to Washington, D.C. was quiet. Dr. Thomas Hargrove sat by the window, laptop unopened. His usual rhythm was gone. No notes, no headlines, no draft edits, just a question echoing. "Then why do you hope you're right?" It was a child's voice, soft, but it had cracked something inside him. He hated that. He prided himself on unshakable footing. Yet here he was, watching trees blur past the window while replaying the tone, the timing, the stillness of that boy's eyes. By the time he reached his office the next morning, he had decided something. He would disprove it. Properly. Not the child, he wasn't petty. But the book, the one that boy clearly believed in, the Qur'an. He pulled a copy from the interface shelf in his personal library, one of dozens of religious texts he kept, but never truly read. He flipped through it. No introductions, no preface, no thesis to challenge, just a bold line on page 1. "This is the book about which there is no doubt." He scoffed out loud. Perfect. The arrogance was already showing. He decided to start from the beginning. Logically, objectively, like a proper philosopher. He read a few verses from Al-Baqarah, then more. At first he was unimpressed. mentions of prayer, of unseen things, of believers and disbelievers. Then came this or, consider, like one who passed by a city which had fallen into ruin. He said, how will Allah bring this to life after its death? So Allah caused him to die for 100 years, then revived him. Surah Al-Baqarah 2:259. He paused. Time reversal, resurrection. Mythology. But then came the line that made him blink. And look at your food and your drink. It has not changed with time. Hargrove leaned back. Food untouched by decay. Yet the man had aged or died. He didn't believe it. But the way it was told me was different than other scripture he'd read. No poetry, no pleading, just direct. And the structure. It didn't read like a man's voice talking about God. It read like God talking to man. And that unnerved him. He closed the book. Enough for one night. He turned off the light. But his mind kept opening chapters without him. The next day he resumed his routine. Lectured, wrote, argued, but something was off. He kept slipping phrases into his thoughts he'd never used before. People of the book, signs in the earth, those who reflect. Where had those come from? He opened the Qur'an again. This time Surah Al-An'am, verse 141. And do not waste the resources, for indeed he does not like the wasteful. He raised a brow. That was modern, efficient, almost ecological. Not mystical nonsense, just pure direct principle. Then he reached Surah Yusuf, a prophet in prison, accused, forgotten, resilient. He didn't expect to enjoy it, but the narrative had depth, emotion, control. This wasn't some mythical fable. It was literature with dignity. He scribbled a note in his journal. If this was fabricated by a man in the desert, why is the voice so consistent? Why does it feel like it's talking to me across time? He paused, then underlined the word feel. He shut the journal. He didn't like where this was going. That evening, he pulled out his debate schedule. He had a podcast recording in 2 weeks titled Why Islam Fails the Test of Logic. It was already outlined. Ready, but now he hesitated. Not because he agreed with Islam, but because he hadn't finished reading, and something inside him whispered, you're not ready to speak because you're not done listening. The next morning at his regular coffee shop, he opened his laptop. But instead of typing a rebuttal script, he Googled who wrote the Qur'an, and what he found didn't help. Every theory collapsed under the same flaw, consistency. No revisions, no contradictions, no evolution of thought. From beginning to end, it carried the same voice, the same gravity. No human writes like that for 23 years. Not without faltering. He rubbed his eyes, closed his laptop, and whispered to himself, what are you doing, Thomas? He didn't have an answer, just a boy's voice, and a book that refused to shut up. Dr. Thomas Hargrove stood across the street from the masjid. It wasn't what he expected. No towering minarets, no echoing chants. Just a simple brick building with a green door and a small sign that read, Masjid al-Haq. The truth, how poetic, he thought. Still, he wasn't here for theology. He was here to observe, to challenge, to settle the storm that Ibrahim, the 10-year-old boy, had unknowingly stirred. Inside, he was greeted by a young man in jeans and a hoodie. Assalamu alaikum, the man said. Thomas nodded. Hello, I'm not here for prayer. I'm just curious. The man smiled. You're welcome. We like curious people here. He was shown to the back of the prayer hall, clean, carpeted, quiet. No music, no icons. Just rows of believers, shoulder to shoulder, bowing in perfect rhythm. Thomas didn't understand the words, but something about it all felt intentional. No theatrics, no emotional manipulation, just submission. After prayer, the imam approached. Mid-40s, calm face, firm handshake. You're visiting, yes. Thomas said, I'm Dr. Hargrove. I lecture on philosophy and comparative belief systems. The imam nodded. Welcome, Dr. Hargrove. I'm Imam Yusuf. They sat in a side room lined with books and tea. Thomas expected the usual pitch. He braced for it. Instead, Imam Yusuf asked, how can I help you? Thomas leaned forward. I'm reading the Qur'an, not for faith, for analysis. Analysis is good, Yusuf said, pouring tea. Reflection is better. I want to understand the arguments, the logic. I've read scriptures before, this one feels different. How so? Thomas paused. It's less about convincing and more about confronting, almost like the voice already knows what I'm thinking. Yusuf smiled. That's because it does. Thomas frowned. You mean God, I mean your soul, the Imam said. Silence. Then Thomas asked, how do you know God is real? Yusuf didn't answer immediately. Instead he asked, do you love your mother? Thomas blinked. Yes, prove it. I've cared for her. I've supported her. I feel it. Exactly, Yusuf said. So you feel it, act on it, and you trust it without ever needing to touch it or test it in a lab. Thomas said nothing. You trust love, Yusuf continued, but hesitate with the one who created love itself. I'm not trying to believe, Thomas said carefully. I'm trying to be honest. Then be honest, Yusuf said gently. What are you afraid of? Thomas hesitated, and in that pause something cracked. I'm afraid, he said finally, that if I let this go further, everything I built will fall apart. Then let it fall, the Imam said. If it wasn't built on truth, it was never yours to keep. The words hit hard, not aggressive, not persuasive, just true. Thomas stood. Thank you for your time. You're always welcome here, Yusuf said, standing with him. No pressure, no strings. Thomas nodded, then asked almost as an afterthought, that boy, Ibrahim, do you know him? Yusuf smiled. He's my nephew. Of course, Thomas thought. That night Thomas didn't sleep. Again, he opened the Qur'an, this time Surah Al-Fusilat. His eyes fell on verse 53. We will show them our signs in the horizons and within themselves until it becomes clear to them that it is the truth. He read it again and again. The wording wasn't emotional, it wasn't poetic, it was inevitable. He closed the book and looked in the mirror. His face hadn't changed, but something in his eyes had. He whispered into the quiet, what happens? If I can't unsee this, it was supposed to be routine. A Thursday evening, an interfaith dialogue at a local community center in Arlington. The theme, Does Faith Still Matter? Dr. Thomas Hargrove had been on these panels dozens of times. His role was always clear, the intellectual foil. He was introduced last. The host smiled warmly. Dr. Hargrove has debated the existence of God for nearly 20 years. His best-selling books challenge belief with logic. Please welcome him. Polite applause. Thomas smiled thinly and took his seat beside a rabbi, a pastor, and he noticed with a twitch of irony, a young imam. It wasn't Yusuf, but the resemblance in demeanor was impossible to miss. The discussion began predictably. The rabbi spoke of tradition, the pastor spoke of grace, the imam spoke of fitra, the natural instinct toward God. Then it was Thomas's turn. He cleared his throat. I don't believe in a divine being, he began. I believe that morality evolves socially, that consciousness is a product of neural complexity, that death is a biological conclusion, not a spiritual doorway. The words came out clean, practiced, but they felt hollow, almost rehearsed. Then a question came from the audience, from a girl in a hijab, maybe 12 years old. She stepped up to the mic. Dr. Hargrove, do you still believe that? Completely, Thomas blinked. What do you mean? She hesitated, then asked, I read one of your books. You sounded sure. Are you still that sure now? The room went silent. All eyes turned to him. He had a choice, deflect or confront. He swallowed hard. I used to be, he said. The words surprised even him. He glanced down at his hands. I used to be sure of a lot of things. The moderator leaned in. Would you like to elaborate? Thomas took a breath, then spoke not from notes but from the ache in his chest. I met a boy recently, 10 years old, Muslim. He didn't debate me. He just asked something I couldn't shake. He asked me if I hoped I was right. He paused. And the truth is, I don't know anymore. There was no applause, just silence. But it wasn't awkward, it was respectful, waiting. He continued softer now. I've been reading the Qur'an, not to agree but to understand, and I don't have answers yet. But I've stopped pretending I don't have questions. The panel ended soon after. People came up to shake his hand, pat his shoulder. But he didn't feel brave. He felt exposed, like a suit of armor had cracked open in front of a crowd. Later that night at home, he received a message. It was from Ibrahim, a voice note. "My uncle told me you went to the masjid, and I heard what you said at the event. I just wanted to say, it's okay to not know. Even I don't know everything, but when I pray, I feel like Allah knows me anyway. Then thank you for listening that day." Most adults don't. Thomas played the message again, then just sat there, phone in hand, staring at the ceiling. He didn't know what to call what he was feeling. It wasn't defeat, it wasn't fear, it was surrender. Not to doctrine, to honesty. He opened the Qur'an again, this time not at the beginning. He let it fall where it may. Surah Al-Ankabut, verse 69. "And those who strive for us, we will surely guide them to our ways. And indeed, Allah is with the doers of good." He stared at it. That line wasn't speaking about the faithful, it was speaking about seekers, even skeptics. He leaned back and said something he hadn't said in 20 years, not out loud, just to himself. "God, if you're real, show me in a way I can't ignore. Not a challenge, not a dare, just an open door." And he had no idea what was about to walk through it. It started with a voicemail. Thomas was walking home from campus when his phone buzzed. The screen showed his sister's name. He answered, but it had already gone to message. He pressed play. "Tom, it's me. It's Mom." She collapsed at the care home. "They're saying it's serious. You need to come. Please." That was it. No poetry, no emotion, just urgency. 3 hours later, he stood in a cold hospital hallway in Baltimore. Fluorescent lights buzzing. The scent of sanitizer thick in the air. His mother lay in a small ICU room, still breathing, but unresponsive. Stroke. Second one in 2 years. This one worse. The neurologist said they'd know more by morning. Thomas sat beside her, holding her hand. It felt smaller now. Fragile. He didn't say much. Just watched the monitor. At 2:37 a.m., the machines beeped in a way that made his heart freeze. But it passed. False alarm. Still, he didn't sleep. Sometime before dawn, a nurse offered him coffee. He declined, then opened his laptop instinctively to distract himself. It was already on the last page. He had read Surah Al-Inshirah. "Did we not expand for you your chest, and we removed from you your burden?" He closed the laptop, not because he didn't want to read, but because it was suddenly too much, too personal, too close. He looked at his mother's face. She'd been a devout woman once. Not outwardly religious, but spiritual in the way she lit candles on Fridays, whispered blessings under her breath, and taught him to pray before meals even when he stopped believing. And now he found himself whispering something. Not an atheist's curse, not a philosopher's question, just something simple. "God, if you're there, don't let her suffer." He didn't expect a miracle, but even saying it cracked something open. The next morning, the doctors confirmed she was stable. No permanent damage yet, still unconscious but showing signs of improvement. Thomas exhaled for the first time in hours. He stepped outside the hospital just as the sun was rising. Everything was still. For the first time in weeks, maybe years, his mind was quiet. No lectures, no counterpoints, no debates. Just stillness. That night he visited Imam Yusuf again, not for an argument, just to talk. They sat in the masjid library, no books open, no tea this time, just silence for a while. Then Thomas spoke. "She almost died," I heard Yusuf said gently. "I made dua for her." Thomas nodded slowly. "I didn't come to talk philosophy tonight." "That's fine," Yusuf replied. "Some truths don't need arguments." Thomas looked up. "Why does it feel like I've been running from something that was chasing me with mercy?" Yusuf smiled. "Because Allah doesn't chase with punishment, He pursues with patience." Thomas closed his eyes, then opened them. "I'm tired," he said. "Good," Yusuf replied. "Why? Because tired hearts are honest hearts, and honest hearts hear better." Thomas pulled something from his coat pocket, a small slip of paper. He placed it on the table. It read, "La ilaha illa Allah." Muhammadur Rasulullah. He had written it himself, from memory, sounded it out phonetically, like a child. "I'm not ready," he whispered. Yusuf nodded. "But you're closer than you've ever been." Thomas didn't say anything else that night, but when he walked home, he didn't feel lost. He felt seen. A week later, Thomas Hargrove drove into the Virginia mountains. No lectures, no emails, just a 2-day retreat, a cabin, a backpack, and one book. Not Plato, not Darwin, not his own. The Qur'an, the copy he once kept out of curiosity, now sat on the passenger seat like a guest he didn't know how to host. The cabin was simple. No Wi-Fi, no phone signal, just trees wind and quiet. He unpacked slowly, built a small fire, boiled tea, then sat outside on the wooden steps with a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. He opened the Qur'an to where he had last marked it. Surah Al-Hajj. His eyes caught this: "Have they not traveled through the land so that their hearts may reason, or ears may hear? For indeed it is not the eyes that are blind, but the hearts in the chest." Surah Al-Hajj 22:46. He closed the book slowly. That verse, it wasn't attacking, it was grieving. Like a whisper meant for someone who had walked too far for too long, like it had been waiting for him. That night he couldn't sleep, not because of discomfort, but because his chest felt too full of what he couldn't say. He got up, lit a lantern, sat on the floor of the cabin, legs folded, and whispered, "Okay, I hear you." The next morning he sat at the small desk near the window. Sunlight broke gently through the trees. He opened the Quran again, this time Surah Az-Zumar, verse 22. "So is one whose heart Allah has opened to Islam, and he is upon a light from his Lord. Woe to those whose hearts are hardened against the remembrance of Allah." He stared at it for a long time. Then he did something he had never done. He stood, faced the east, and bowed. Not perfectly, not even with full understanding, but he bowed, hands on knees, then fell into sujud. No audience, no conversion speech, no imam watching, just one man in the silence of the forest. He stayed there a long time, then sat up, whispered something he'd practiced for weeks, never sure he'd say, "Ashhadu alla ilaha illallah, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah." Tears came not violently, gently, like a stream that finally found its way through. He sat with the stillness, then laughed, alone, joyfully. Who would have thought? He whispered to the trees, a 10-year-old boy would undo 30 years of my philosophy. He stayed in the cabin one more night. Before dawn, he woke for Fajr, not because someone told him to, but because something inside him was already awake. He prayed with shaky motions, but the last sujud felt right. When he drove back to the city, the world hadn't changed. Same buildings, same traffic, same news cycle, but he had. He didn't make an announcement, didn't post anything, didn't call anyone. Instead, he texted Imam Yusuf. I said the words. "I did the sujud, and I haven't felt this light since childhood." Yusuf replied minutes later, "Allahu Akbar." "Welcome home, brother." He smiled. Brother. The word hit different now. It wasn't intellectual. It wasn't ceremonial. It was real. It had been 3 months since the cabin. 3 months since Thomas Hargrove, the man once known for dissecting belief, had dropped every defense and whispered the Shahada alone in the woods. Since then, he'd done everything quietly. He met with Imam Yusuf regularly, learned how to pray properly, took his first Arabic class, bought a prayer rug, even tried fasting for the first time. He didn't announce anything, didn't go public, but those closest to him noticed. He smiled more, listened more, spoke less. Then one morning he received an email from the same private school in Virginia. "We're holding another interfaith panel for our 5th and 6th graders. You were a favorite last time. We'd love to have you back." He read it twice, then chuckled to himself. If only they knew. He replied, "I'd be honored, but my answers this time might surprise you." When he arrived, the same librarian greeted him. "Dr. Hargrove, welcome back." She didn't notice the subtle difference. No briefcase this time, just a folded Quran in his coat pocket. He stepped into the library just like before. Same green carpet, same circle of kids, and at the far end, same brown eyes. Ibrahim, older now, maybe 11, taller, still quiet, still composed. When their eyes met, Ibrahim smiled, soft, knowing. But he didn't say anything. Not yet. The panel began. The same introductions, same format. This time, though, the teacher said something new. Dr. Hargrove has spent years exploring the boundaries of faith and reason. Recently, he's begun a new journey that some of you might find very interesting. All eyes turned. Thomas stood slowly, cleared his throat. Last time I was here, I told you I didn't believe in God. That was true then. Since that day, I've read the Qur'an, not to destroy it, but to understand it. I sat with Muslims, prayed beside them, listened more than I spoke, and somewhere between ayah and sujud, I stopped fighting. The room was dead silent. Then a small hand went up. Ibrahim. The teacher nodded. He stood. Dr. Hargrove. Are you Muslim now? Thomas looked at him. Paused. Yes, he said. I am. The class gasped. Some kids clapped. A few just stared in awe. But Ibrahim just smiled. Then said Alhamdulillah. After the panel, students and teachers swarmed him with questions. But Ibrahim stayed back, waited until the others left, then walked up, hands in his pockets. Do you remember what I asked you last time? He said. Thomas grinned. If I hoped I was right, Ibrahim nodded. And now Thomas laughed softly. Now I know I was wrong, and I'm so glad I was. They walked quietly to the front of the school, side by side, no pressure. Before parting, Ibrahim reached into his backpack, pulled out a small gift, a brand new prayer rug. I saved up for it, he said shyly. I thought you might need your own now. Thomas held it stunned. The colors were deep green and gold. It felt like more than cloth. It felt like closure. No, a beginning. I don't know what to say, Thomas whispered. Say Bismillah when you use it, Ibrahim said with a grin. They hugged briefly, just enough, then went their separate ways. That evening, Thomas rolled the rug out in his study, faced the Qibla, and stood, then bowed, then whispered Subhana Rabbiyal Azim, then sujud, forehead to fabric, heart to heaven, and somewhere far beyond logic and language, beyond ego and argument, the man who used to debate the world finally stopped speaking and just listened. Of the debate, of the doubt, of the distance, and the beginning of a life in sujud.